I keep my hand on the transmit key, even though there's nothing left to say, even though the static has taken on a quality I've learned to recognize as permanent. The metal is warm under my palm, warmer than it should be, warmer than the regulations specify, warmer than anything has a right to be in a bunker 700 meters underground, where the temperature gauges haven't moved from 4 degrees in the 3 months since we lost contact with secondary command. My fingers have molded to the key's shape. Sometimes I forget they're separate things, my flesh and the brass, until I try to pull away and feel the skin tug, stuck by old sweat and something else, something tacky that might be blood from where I've worried the cuticles down to nothing. The Vox unit hums. It never stops humming. Even when the generators failed and we switched to auxiliary power, even when auxiliary power failed and we jury-rigged the officers' quarters lighting circuits to feed the communications array, the hum persisted. A vibration that lives in my teeth now, in my jaw, in the bones of my skull. I've forgotten what silence sounds like. The war was already 3 years old when I graduated from the Schola Militarum on Varsavia, already old enough that the veterans who trained us had a particular look in their eyes, a distance that I mistook for wisdom. They taught us the litanies of the Vox, the proper protocols for battlefield communications, the sacred duty of maintaining the Imperium's voice across the chaos of war. They taught us to recognize the 17 distinct categories of distress signals, to prioritize transmissions according to the Departamento Munitorum's hierarchy of urgency, to remain calm when calmness was the only thing standing between coordinated defense and total collapse. They did not teach us what to do when the transmissions stop coming. They did not teach us what to do when we become the last voice screaming into an empty channel, when the static develops textures and rhythms that sound almost like language, almost like breathing, almost like something listening on the other end. My name was Operative Tertius Venn. I say was because names mean something different now. Down here in the deep places where the war's last dregs have settled like sediment at the bottom of a toxic well, there are 16 of us left in Bunker Tertius 77, though us might be a generous term for what we've become. Lieutenant Kraus still gives orders, still performs the daily inspection, still marks the tactical charts with positions that no longer exist for units that stopped responding weeks ago. Medica Yellen still distributes the ration packs, still checks our vitals with instruments whose batteries died a month back, still nods with professional satisfaction at readings she can no longer see. Trooper Vess still stands guard at the primary hatch, his Lazaraful charged and ready, aimed at a door that hasn't opened since the shelling collapsed the access tunnel and buried us in our tomb. We maintain the rituals because the rituals are all we have, because the moment we stop is the moment we admit what we already know but cannot speak. The enemy has won. The planet is lost. We are forgotten. My station is in the communications chamber, a room 4 meters square with walls lined in cork insulation that's gone grey and mouldy in the constant damp. 3 Vox units occupy the central bench, though only the primary still functions. The secondary's cathode screen cracked during a near-miss artillery strike that killed Operative Secundus and left me sole custodian of our voices, and the tertiary unit burned out its transformer in the desperate final hours when every channel went dead simultaneously and I cycled through frequencies so fast my fingers blistered on the hot dials. I can still see the scorch marks on the metal casing, smell the bitter chemical reek of melted insulation, hear the pop and whine that preceded the terminal failure. That was 73 days ago. I've kept count by marking the wall beside my cot, 1 scratch for each sleep cycle, though sleep is another word that's lost its meaning in the permanent electric twilight of emergency lighting. The Vox hisses and pops. I adjust the tuning dial a fraction of a degree, my movements automatic, trained, religious. Static washes through the headphones clamped over my ears, a surf of white noise that's become more familiar than my own heartbeat. I close my eyes and listen for patterns, for anything that might be human speech beneath the interference. The interference is always there now, thick and greasy, coating every frequency like oil on water. It wasn't always like this. In the early days of the deployment, the channels were clear, professional, efficient. Orders flowed down from regimental command with parade ground precision. Status reports flowed up with identical regularity. The Vox was a lifeline, proof that we were part of something larger, that the war had structure and purpose, and eventual victory written into its design. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 months into the campaign when Forward Operating Base Delta stopped responding to hails during their scheduled check-in. This wasn't unusual. Vox discipline was strict, and field units often maintained communication silence during tactical operations. But when their silence stretched through the backup check-in and then the emergency check-in, Lieutenant Krauss ordered me to send a runner priority request up to brigade. The response came back 6 hours later. Delta had been overrun during the night. Total casualties, no survivors, maintain current positions and await reinforcement. We lowered our heads and returned to our duties. Wars have casualties. We had trained for this. The Emperor protects, and when he doesn't, he demands we die with our hands on our weapons and his name on our lips. But then Firebase Gamma went silent, then Outpost Kappa, then the supply depot. At grid, reference 7794, one by one, the voices on the Vox network winked out like stars consumed by an advancing darkness. I would call their designations, wait through the prescribed interval, call again, wait again, follow the protocol exactly as trained, and receive only static in reply. My logbook filled with unanswered hails, each one a small death, a tiny amputation of the network that had made us an army instead of scattered clusters of frightened men. Lieutenant Krauss kept insisting it was enemy jamming, that the cogitator minds were working on a solution, that reinforcements were being routed to our sector. The morning reports he filed grew longer, more detailed, more insistent on our readiness and high morale. I transmitted them faithfully on the designated frequencies, watched them vanish into the static, and said nothing about the fact that no acknowledgement ever came back. The smell started around then, a sweetness in the air that had nothing to do with the ration packs or the chemical toilets or the 13 sweating bodies sharing a sealed environment. It came through the ventilation ducts, subtle at first, almost pleasant, like flowers left too long in a vase. Medicae Yellen said it was bacteria blooming in the moisture condensers, that she'd flush the system with antiseptic when we received our next supply drop. The supply drop never came. The smell grew stronger. Now it's so thick I can taste it on my tongue, a cloying rot sweetness that coats my throat and makes every breath feel contaminated. I've stuffed cloth in the ventilation grates above my station, but it doesn't help. The smell finds its way through, patient and inexorable as time. Sometimes I dream about the surface. We've been underground so long I've started to forget what the sky looks like, whether it was blue or gray, or the poisoned green that pre-deployment briefings said we should expect from the enemy's atmospheric processes. In my dreams, I walk through ash fields, under a sun that's too large, too red, too close. The ground is soft, yielding, organic. When I look down, I see faces beneath the ash, mouths open, eyes staring up at nothing. They don't speak, but I hear them anyway, their voices coming through my headphones, through the Vox unit that somehow followed me into sleep. A chorus of the lost asking me to relay their final messages to commands that no longer exist. I wake with my hand on the transmit key, always on the transmit key, my fingers having found it by instinct in the dark. The Vox unit's hum changes pitch. A small variation, barely perceptible, but I've listened to this machine for so many hours that I know its voice better than I know my own thoughts. I lean forward, press the headphones tighter against my ears, and adjust the gain. The static shifts develop striations, layers of interference that pulse with something almost like rhythm, almost like words. I hold my breath and listen. Nothing. Just the static, just the hum, just the sound of empty frequencies stretching into forever. But for a moment, for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard breathing. Anything. Lieutenant Krauss stands in the doorway, his uniform still creased despite having no way to press it, his face gray in the emergency lights. He asks the same question every 4 hours, on the dot, has asked it without variation for 73 days. I give him the same answer I always give. Negative, sir. All channels clear. No traffic. Continue monitoring. The relief force could break through at any moment. Yes, sir. He lingers in the doorway, his eyes distant, focused on something I can't see. His lips move silently, counting or praying or reciting regulations. Finally he nods, turns, walks back toward the command chamber where his charts and reports wait with patient irrelevance. I watch him go and feel something twist in my chest, pity or grief, or the ghost of what used to be respect. He still believes, despite everything, despite the silence that's become our only certainty. He still believes that help is coming, that the Imperium hasn't forgotten us, that our sacrifice has meaning beyond the simple biological fact of death. I used to believe that too. The rations are running low. Medicae Yellen hasn't said so directly, but I've seen her dividing the packs into smaller portions, stretching each meal across longer intervals. We're down to one feeding every 20 hours, and the packs themselves are 5 years past their shelf life indicators. The NutriPaste gone grainy and bitter, the protein supplements oxidized to the color of rust. My gums bleed when I eat. Everyone's do. Yellen says it's minor scurvy, that our bodies are metabolizing their own tissues for vitamins we're no longer receiving. She says it like it's a temporary condition, something that will resolve itself once supply lines are re-established. No one asks her what happens when the last ration pack is consumed. No one wants to hear the answer we all know. I've lost weight, we all have. My uniform hangs loose on my frame, the fabric stiff with old sweat, and the powdery residue that's begun to accumulate on every surface. I don't know what the residue is. It appears overnight, a fine dusting like ash or pollen, coating the equipment, the walls, my skin. I wipe it away, and it returns. I've stopped wiping. Sometimes I catch myself examining the powder on my fingertips, feeling its texture, slightly oily, faintly warm, with a smell like burnt sugar and meat. I don't tell anyone about this. I file it in the growing catalogue of things we don't discuss, along with the sounds in the walls and Trooper Vess's conversations with his post, and the way Private Kelm has started writing on his arms in his own blood, tiny script that covers every centimeter of exposed skin, words I can't read in the dim light. The Vox crackles. I snap alert, my exhaustion forgotten, my hand flying to the tuning dial. The crackle comes again, 3 sharp bursts. Deliberate, patterned, not random interference. Something else. I adjust the frequency, tracking the signal, my breath shallow in my throat. The crackle resolves into a carrier wave, clean and strong, the first real transmission I've heard in 73 days. My fingers shake as I key the microphone. Bunker Tertius 77 to any Imperial forces, do you receive? Over. Silence. The carrier wave continues, a pure tone that sits in my ears like pressure. I try again. This is Bunker Tertius 77, 16 souls, requesting immediate extraction or resupply. Our position is grid reference. I rattle off the coordinates burned into my memory, speaking quickly, professionally, the words spilling out in the trained cadence of proper Vox protocol. The carrier wave doesn't change. I finish my transmission and wait, counting seconds, following the procedure, giving them time to respond. Nothing. I'm about to call again when the carrier wave cuts out, replaced instantly by static so loud I rip the headphones off my head. The sudden silence in the room is shocking. I can hear my own breathing, harsh and ragged. I can hear the Vox units, hum, steady and patient. I can hear Lieutenant Kraus shouting from the command chamber, asking what happened, demanding a report. I pick up the headphones with trembling hands and fit them back over my ears. The static is different now, thicker. It has weight and texture and almost shapes moving through it, like shadows in deep water. I twist the dial through the frequencies, searching for the carrier wave, for any signal at all. Nothing. Every channel has the new static, the dense static, the static that sounds like it's being generated from somewhere close, somewhere inside the bunker, somewhere inside my own skull. I key the microphone again, not because I expect a response, but because the silence is worse than futility. Any Imperial forces, this is Bunker Tertius 77. We are combat effective and await orders. Emperor. Protects. Over. My voice sounds small and foolish in the empty room. The static doesn't answer. It never answers. It only listens, patient and hungry and vast beyond my ability to comprehend. Lieutenant Kraus appears in the doorway again, his face tight with hope I know I'm about to kill. Was that a transmission? Did you make contact? Carrier wave, sir. No voice traffic, no identification. It dropped after 30 seconds. But someone's out there. Someone's broadcasting. Yes, sir. Possibly. What do you mean, possibly? You said there was a carrier wave. Yes, sir, but... I hesitate, searching for words to explain what I heard, what I felt in that brief moment of signal clarity. It didn't feel right, sir. The tone was wrong. The frequency was unusual. Unusual how? I don't know, sir. It's just that in 3 years of monitoring Vox traffic, I've never heard anything quite like it. The harmonics were off, too clean, too perfect. Kraus stares at me with the intensity of a man drowning who's just seen something that might be driftwood or might be another drowning man, or might be a hallucination born of oxygen deprivation and terror. He wants the signal to mean salvation. He needs it to mean that. The alternative, that we heard something else, something that shouldn't exist on any imperial frequency, is too large to fit inside his carefully maintained reality. Note it in the log, he says finally. Continue monitoring. If they broadcast again, I want to know immediately. Yes, sir. He leaves. I turn back to the Vox unit, to the static, to my vigil. I don't log the transmission. The logbook ran out of pages 3 weeks ago, and I haven't asked for a new one because there's nothing left to log except the slow countdown to an ending we all understand but cannot name. Instead, I sit with my hand on the transmit key and listen to the static breathe. The dreams are getting worse. Last night, or what passes for night in our timeless rotation of watches and duties, I dreamed I opened the bunker hatch and found that the war had ended centuries ago. The trenches had filled with soil, and grass grew in the shell craters. Trees rose from the rusted hulls of tanks. Everything was green and growing and alive, with a life that had nothing to do with humanity, that had forgotten we ever existed. I walked through this transformed landscape, calling into my handset, trying to raise someone, anyone, my voice echoing across the peaceful emptiness. The Vox unit was hot in my hands, growing hotter, the metal glowing red and then white, melting into my flesh, fusing with my bones. I couldn't drop it. It had become part of me, or I had become part of it, and my voice was no longer my voice but the machine's voice, broadcasting endlessly on dead frequencies, screaming coordinates into the void. I woke up smelling burnt meat. My hands were clenched so tight on the transmit key that I'd driven my nails through the skin of my palms. Small crescents of blood welled in the wounds. I cleaned them with the last of my antiseptic and said nothing to Medicae Yellen during her morning inspection. Some things are better kept private, locked away in the spaces where we store the knowledge that we're dying by degrees and there's no help coming, and there never was. Trooper Vess stopped guarding the hatch. I noticed it on my way to the latrine, saw his post empty for the first time in 73 days, his las rifle propped against the wall, still charged, still ready. I found him in the sleeping quarters, curled on his cot, facing the wall. When I spoke his name, he didn't respond. When I touched his shoulder, his body was rigid, muscles locked, skin cold and waxy. His eyes were open. They tracked me as I moved, following my motion with mechanical precision, but he didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't breathe. I backed away slowly and found Medicae Yellen. She examined him with her dead instruments, going through the ritual of vital signs she could know. Longer measure. Finally she straightened, her face composed in the professional mask she wears like armor against the chaos. Catatonic, she announced. Stress-induced dissociative state. He needs rest, proper nutrition and psychological evaluation. Will he recover? She looked at me with eyes that had stopped expecting questions she could answer honestly. Yes. When help arrives, the Medicae facilities will be able to treat him. We both knew she was lying. We both pretended we didn't. I returned to my station and she returned to whatever she does in the medical bay, and Trooper Vess remained on his cot, his body a breathing statue, his eyes tracking movements only he could see. No one has taken his place at the hatch. There's no point. If something tries to come through that door, whether it's relief forces or the enemy or something worse, we're in no position to stop it. We can only wait and listen to the static and feel the walls pressing closer every day. The smell has changed again. Beneath the sweet rot there's something else now, something mineral and electric, like ozone or burning copper wire. It's strongest near the ventilation ducts, but also seems to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the bunker is exhaling fumes we were never meant to breathe. Private Kelm says it's the Emperor's judgment, that we've been weighed and found wanting, that the smell is sin made manifest in the air we pollute with our unworthy lungs. He says this while writing on his arms, his legs, his chest, covering every surface of skin with script so dense it looks like bruising. I asked him once what he was writing. He looked at me with eyes full of desperate certainty and said, "The names, all their names, someone has to remember." I didn't ask whose names. I was afraid he would tell me. The carrier wave returned 3 times now over the span of 48 hours, always at irregular intervals, always the same clean tone, always disappearing before I can establish proper. Each time it comes, I feel a spike of hope so violent it's almost painful, a galvanic jolt that reminds me I haven't fully surrendered yet, that some part of me still believes in rescue and survival and life beyond this tomb. Each time it vanishes, the hope drains a little more, leaving behind a residue of despair that accumulates like the powder on every surface. The 3rd time, I didn't report it to Lieutenant Krauss. I don't know why. Perhaps because I saw something in his eyes during the last briefing, a fragmentation, a splintering of the careful discipline that's kept him functional. He spent 6 hours yesterday updating the tactical charts, marking enemy positions that haven't moved in months, calculating artillery fire solutions for guns that ran out of ammunition before we were buried. When I brought him his ration, I found he'd drawn new fortifications on the map in red pencil, elaborate defensive networks covering the entire theater of operations, complete with supply routes and reinforcement schedules and victory timelines that extended years into a future that will never come. He was smiling as he drew, humming the cantata of the martyred Savior under his breath, his hands steady and sure in their delusion. I left his ration on the desk and returned to my station without speaking. If madness is the price of hope, perhaps we should all be grateful for the numbness that's settling over the rest of us like frost. I've started talking to the Vox unit. Not broadcasting, just talking, whispered conversations in the empty hours between Lieutenant Krauss's scheduled check-ins. I tell it things I can't tell the others, thoughts that would break whatever fragile cohesion we've maintained. I tell it I'm afraid. I tell it I've forgotten what the sun feels like on skin. I tell it about Operative Secundus, whose name was Mara, who taught me the proper way to splice a damaged cable and who died with her hands on her equipment, trying to restore a connection that was already lost. I tell it about my mother on Varsavia, who cried at my graduation, who said she was proud I was serving the Emperor, who has no way of knowing her child died in a hole in the ground on a world whose name she's never heard. The Vox unit hums, and I imagine it's listening. I imagine it cares. The static sometimes forms patterns that sound almost like responses, almost like sympathy, almost like a voice saying, "I hear you, I understand, you are not alone in the dark. I know this is impossible. I know the Vox unit is a machine unthinking and incapable of sentiment. But in the loneliness that's become our permanent condition, impossible comfort is still comfort, and I'll take what I can get. The powder is thicker. It falls from the ceiling now in visible drifts, accumulating in corners, in the folds of our uniforms, in our hair and eyes and mouths. Private Kelm tried to sweep it up, working with manic intensity for 6 hours straight, but for every handful he collected, more fell to replace it. Eventually he collapsed from exhaustion, his arms still covered in writing, his lips moving in silent recitation of names that might be real or might be drawn from whatever private hell he's learned to inhabit. Medicae Yellen declared him unfit for duty and sedated him with the last of her chemical stocks. He sleeps now on a cot next to Trooper Vess, 2 statues breathing in unison, their chests rising and falling with mechanical regularity. We are 14 now, or maybe 13. Corporal Way hasn't left his quarters in 5 days, and when I passed his door, I heard sounds that might have been crying or laughing or something that's learned to imitate both. No one has checked on him. We've developed an unspoken agreement that privacy means not witnessing each other's disintegration, that mercy means allowing people to fall apart without audience. I think about this while monitoring the static, while keeping my hand on the transmit key, while breathing the powder-thick air and tasting rot sweetness and copper on my tongue. I think about how we're all still maintaining our duties, still following our protocols, still acting like soldiers in an army that no longer exists in a war that's already been lost. The rituals give structure to the decay. They let us pretend that what we're doing has purpose beyond the simple animal impulse to keep moving until movement becomes impossible. The vox crackles, not the carrier wave this time, but something else, something irregular and organic. I lean forward, every nerve suddenly alert, and fine-tune the frequency. The crackle resolves into, not words, not exactly, but something shaped like words, something that has learned language from the outside and is trying to wear it like clothing that doesn't quite fit. The sounds are almost syllables, almost phonemes, almost human speech, processed through something that has no throat, no tongue, no understanding of what meaning actually is. I should report this. Protocol demands it, but I don't reach for the intercom. Instead, I key the microphone, my hand trembling, my mouth dry with fear that tastes like metal and ash. This is Bunker Tertius 77. Identify yourself. The almost words stop. Silence fills the channel, so complete and profound that I can hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, slowly, the static begins to change. It thickens, develops mass, becomes something I can feel pressing against my eardrums like fingers made of sound. And through that pressure, through that impossible density of noise, I hear something that might be my name. Ven. My hands freeze on the controls. My breath stops in my throat. The voice, if it's a voice, speaks again, closer now, more certain. Each syllable formed with increasing precision. Ven, Operative Tertius Ven, we hear you. We have always heard you. Who is this? My whisper is barely audible over the roaring in my head. Identify your unit. We are no unit. We are what comes. After units, after ranks, after the war and all its futures. We are what listens when you scream into the empty channels. We are what answers when there is nothing left to answer. I rip the headphones off. The voice continues anyway, not in my ears now, but behind them, in the meat of my brain where thoughts are born. The Vox unit glows, not with electrical heat, but with something else. A bioluminescence like deep-sea creatures or diseased tissue. The powder in the air swirls in patterns that remind me of script, of Kelm's desperate writing, of messages being composed in a language I almost recognize. I am on my feet, stumbling backwards, my shoulder hitting the doorframe. The voice follows. You have been calling so long, Ven, calling and calling and calling. Did you think no one was listening? Did you think the static was empty? You're not real. You're shock, hypoxia, contamination, something. We are what you made us. Every unanswered transmission, every plea broadcast into silence, every desperate prayer sent up to deaf channels. We drank them all. We grew strong on your isolation, and now we are ready to answer. The Vox unit's hum rises in pitch, becoming a whine, becoming a shriek. The emergency lights flicker. Somewhere in the bunker, someone screams, a raw animal sound that cuts off abruptly, as if strangled or silenced or transformed into something that no longer requires a voice. I want to run, but there's nowhere to go. We're 700 meters down in a sealed environment with no functioning exits. There is no escape, no retreat, no possibility of anything except what's coming. The voice speaks again, and this time it's kind, gentle, almost loving. Don't be afraid, Operative Ven. We're here to relieve you. Your watch is over. You can put down the burden now. You can finally rest. What are you? We are the answer to your prayers. We are the relief force you've been waiting for. We are what the Imperium sends when it has nothing left to send but dreams. And static and the promises it whispers to the dying. The powder swirls faster now, coalescing into shapes that might be figures, or might be holes in reality, wearing the memory of figures. They move through the bunker with purpose, flowing like water or smoke, or thought given terrible substance. I hear more screams, brief and sharp, followed by sounds that might be laughter or might be the noise flesh makes when it forgets how to be flesh. I back against the wall, my hands pressed to my ears, but the voice is inside me now, past all barriers, intimate as heartbeat and breath. Come then. Transmit yourself. Become part of the signal. Join your voice with ours. We are so lonely out here in the static. We need you. We need all of you. The war is over. The war is just beginning. The war is eternal, and you are its voice, its witness, its faithful operator maintaining contact when all contact has failed. Something moves in the doorway. Medicare Yellen, or what used to be Medicare Yellen. Her body wrong in ways I can't process, her angles gone strange, her skin translucent and showing the light that pulses underneath. She extends a hand toward me and her fingers are too long, too many, each one terminating in something that looks like a connector jack, like the cables I splice and maintain and speak through. Join us, Ven, she says with her mouth, and with the voice in my head, and with the static that's become the only reality. We're all here, all your lost transmissions, all the voices that went into the dark. We've been received, we've been integrated, the signal is perfect now, the message is complete. We just need you to close the channel. I slide down the wall, my legs giving out, my body finally surrendering to the exhaustion I've carried for 73 days. The floor is soft beneath me, warmer than it should be, pulsing with rhythms that sync with my heartbeat. The Vox unit behind me shrieks and sings and hums, and I understand now that it's not a machine anymore, that it's become a mouth, a throat, a means of transmission for something that learned to be hungry in the spaces between words. My hand finds the transmit key one last time. Muscle memory, training, the litanies they taught me in the Scolum Militarum on a world that might as well be a myth. I press down, feel the connection complete, hear the carrier wave open like a door I've been knocking on forever. Bunker Tertius 7-7, I whisper into the microphone, into the static, into the vast listening emptiness that swallowed our war and our world, and every certainty I thought I understood. Final transmission. 16 souls lost, no survivors, no rescue required. We've been received, message ends. I release the key. The static swells, triumphant and terrible and sweet, with a sweetness that's been growing in the air for months. Medicare Yellen that was touches my face with her too many fingers, and the touch burns cold, burns hot, burns with the sensation of dissolving boundaries, of barriers coming down, of self becoming signal, becoming part of something vast and patient and eternally, perfectly, impossibly connected. The voice speaks one final time, though whether it comes from outside or inside, or from the place where outside and inside have ceased to be distinct concepts, I can no longer tell. Welcome home, Operative Ven. Your watch is over. Your war is over. Now you can truly begin to serve. The emergency lights fail. In the darkness that follows, I feel my body coming apart, cell by cell, each piece retained and remembered and integrated into the vast static network that's been growing in the quantum spaces between transmissions. I am dissolving but not dying. I am becoming signal, becoming broadcast, becoming the answer to every unanswered call I ever sent into the darkness. My last coherent thought is a line from the communications litanies they drilled into us until they became reflex. The Emperor's word must be carried even unto death for his voice is the light in darkness, and his message is eternal. They never told us what happens when the darkness learns to speak back. They never warned us that eternity can flow in both directions, that the void between communications might develop its own intelligence, its own hunger, its own patient and implacable desire to be heard. The static takes me. I become part of the network, part of the vast signals spreading through the dead channels of a lost war. My voice joins the chorus of the integrated, all the operators and soldiers and forgotten souls who broadcast their final messages into the silence and received an answer they never expected. We are the Vox now. We are the transmission that never ends. We are what happens when nobody comes to relieve the watch, when the war goes on so long it learns to feed on itself, when isolation becomes so profound it generates its own form of connection. Somewhere, on another dying world, another operator sits alone in another bunker, hand on the transmit key, listening to static and waiting for relief that will never come. They don't know it yet, but we're already there, in the hum of their equipment, in the whisper between frequencies, in the sweet rot smell beginning to seep through their ventilation ducts. We're coming to answer their call. We're coming to relieve their duty. We're coming to tell them the war is over, the war continues. The war has become something new and terrible and perfect in its own terrible way. The Emperor protects, they said. They never told us what he protects us from, or what protects us when he turns away, or what we become in the spaces he's forgotten to fill with his light. The static knows. The static remembers. The static is patient and kind, and will never ever let us stop transmitting. This is Bunker Tertius 77, broadcasting on all frequencies forever and ever and ever. Do you receive? Over.